Good morning, Gamecock fans. JC Shurburtt here with you. Today is Monday, February 10th, the year of our Lord 2025, and this is Coffee. I want to thank everyone for listening. Today, I'm going to get right to the topic of the day. I'm pre-recording this, by the way. I don't normally pre-record coffee. I like to get up, see what's out there. Really don't even decide on the topics until right before we go on. I kind of don't pre-plan those because it's supposed to be a little newsy, a little updatey, um, because it's in the morning and all that good stuff. I can tell you that the Gamecocks lost in men's basketball yesterday, 80-57 at Kentucky, and that's all I got to say about that one. That was a frustrating game to watch, as most of them are. And we'll see what happens moving forward. Now 0-10 in the SEC. Women's game hadn't started yet. Super Bowl hadn't started yet. I have no idea. We're going to a Super Bowl party tonight. It will obviously be late into the evening before I get home, and I usually try to take coffee around 5 my time. So I'm doing this early, so you guys will have a coffee. and the topics really hadn't changed, so I hope nothing crazy happens between now and then. But it's normally tape day up, but we're going to tape it early today, and it's the Super Bowl, and kind of a tradition that my wife and I do over at the good folks at Tavern. One price, all you can eat, all you can drink. Super Bowl squares. They play the squares game, all that good stuff. So I'm looking forward to it. Haven't really had a lot of fun since we started this. It's episode 21, just because. Like I said, getting up every morning, getting this out, takes a lot of time and energy and things of that nature. But hey, don't feel sorry for me, man. It's a joy to do this and to bring this to all of you guys and gals every single day out there in Gamecock land. Want to talk today. We have kind of themes of the week unofficially here. Now, if there's news, we get to it and focus on that. But we have some themes of the week. Last week, I dove into some position battles that mattered: defensive end, running back, talked a bit about the 2025 recruiting class. Today, we're going to kind of move forward on coffee and start looking and digging into the 2026 recruiting class at South Carolina. I've said for a while, I've had my eye on this class simply because there's a lot of in-state talent, a lot of players in the state of South Carolina. You wouldn't know it by looking at the rankings right now, but a lot of players in South Carolina that have legit major early offers. And yeah, it's still early. I know everybody's ranked early now and all that good stuff, but it's still early. There's be players that pop up. Remember, I think it was around this time last year, Malik Clark was just getting offered. That's probably why he didn't go any higher than 108th in the country when all was said and done, because it's you rank so many early, and then you don't have any room for the newcomers. So I don't know. I'm not going to go old man yells at cloud now and pine for the days where we put out a watch list in February and they didn't rank the class that was going to be seniors until June after we had been to Nike camps. I know it's not coming back. A lot of things aren't coming back. We used to sign letters of intent up until recently via fax machine. That's not coming back. Lots of things aren't coming back ever again. Blockbuster Video, not coming back, unfortunately. That was fun. My brother used to work at Blockbuster. Anyway, so South Carolina, obviously this is another big class. There's an opportunity here. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be a clean sweep of the state. There's a lot of competition for some of these guys. Georgia's come across the border and offered several. They're in the mix. Clemson is doing more in-state because there's more talent. They're going to be a formidable opponent. What you don't want is to have your Tennessees, North Carolinas, Florida States, Auburns, the schools that have come in before in through history and swipe talent. That's a tough one. That's tough. Clemson and Georgia, you live with it. You fight the battle and you go for it and try to win as many as you can. You're not going to win them all against those two. You want to minimize Georgia and not make South Carolina kind of like Tennessee has made North Carolina, the hot spot for players to go. And you want to beat Clemson head to head as much as you can. You don't always go against those guys head to head because there's some players they don't mess with in the state. A lot of those guys are called NFL draft picks from the University of South Carolina as well. So that's been a good formula through the years for the Gamecocks to get in-state talent, and this year's really, really good as far as it goes with that. It's a cycling upstate. Now, my hope is moving forward that this is just the start and that South Carolina as a state is going to get back to the days where it's 15, 20 deep of power four guys, known guys, and then it could get to even like 30, 35 with D1, not necessarily D1, I'm sorry, because FCS is a D1, with bowl FBS, I guess is what they call it, the not FCS guys going. I think it's possible, and there's been years it's done that. A lot of the times you'll see players that pop up late and head out of state. You just don't, they kind of come out of nowhere. But the hope is that the state continues to do that. I think the population growth will help. I do understand there's a lot of folks that are retired that are moving to South Carolina, but I also understand the schools are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So there's got to be some people with kids that are moving in, and the state is growing. And population, when you're in a state that cares about football, like not New York. New York's not a football state, but the other bigger states, that matters. Population is what matters. Population is why Georgia passed Ohio as one of the top 4 talent producing states in America. And South Carolina, just like Tennessee has, South Carolina can get there. I think actually South Carolina probably has a little more upside than Tennessee. It's more condensed. It's not as big of a state geographically, but that's fine. There's probably better football top to bottom in South Carolina. It's much more like Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi than it is like Tennessee. So I believe the Gamecocks will benefit from an expanded in-state talent pool, just like it's always been. So that's exciting. I think if you care about high school football in the Palmetto State, even if you're a Clemson fan or another fan listening to this show, you probably should care about that. That's exciting. And then I think if you're a Gamecock fan, that's also exciting because it's not as challenging. It's challenging to keep everybody in state for sure. I don't want to make it sound like it's a layup, but you have a more of an in with home field advantage in recruiting in college football. And that's just always how it's been. And it's that way everywhere. I mean, Ohio State has advantages with Ohio kids, LSU and Louisiana, all that. Now, these days, kids will go out of state in a heartbeat. They don't really care. I mean, you look at Alabama this year, the Tide and Auburn, although Auburn signed most of the in-state talent in 2025, there was a kid that went to Ohio State and a kid that went to Oregon from the state of Alabama. So, there you go. Welcome to the NIL world. You won't bat 1,000, but it's critical. It's critical for South Carolina to have a good in-state talent base, and 2026 certainly is one that I believe is cycling up. Of course, 2 of those guys are already committed to South Carolina or at South Carolina, and that's Jordan Gidron, the wide receiver from Ridgeview, and Donovan Murph, the other wide receiver from Irmo. And I've said a couple of times I was kind of sweating those guys because Carolina has a needed receiver, but to get those guys in and get them in early, there's probably 2 of the top 3 that were originally slotted for this class in state already. Murph is not there yet. Obviously, he gets there this summer, but already locked and loaded for the Gamecocks. So you're ahead before you've even started competing, really, when stuff like that happens. So hats off to Shane Beamer and his staff for getting those 2 in the boat. And then there's some key guys, the offensive lineman from down at the local, I think it's Timberland. Yeah, I think Timberland. Desmond Green. He is a big guy. Georgia wants him. Georgia has I don't know if they've taken the lead, but he's going to visit, and the Gamecocks will certainly continue to battle there for him. Yeah, Desmond Green, St. Stephen, Timberland, big kid, 6'5", almost 360 pounds. Good grief. Tamarian Watkins is a player I've talked about a lot from Northwestern, a big freaky 6'4" safety. Georgia's in on him. A&M's in on him. South Carolina's in on him. You've got Pro Anderson at Contavian Pro Anderson at Dorman. Visited Clemson this past weekend. Looks like the Tigers made a big move. Did grow up a Clemson fan. This player, Carver's Bay is a great place to get players because it has a low bust rate, but, most of their last names have been Gathers. This is Zion Gills from Carver's Bay, another offensive lineman. There's several in this class, 6'5", 280 tackle type. He set an official visit to South Carolina. And this week, we're going to go through either on the show or on coffee, all the guys that have scheduled official visits, kind of what their deal is. And all that. But Anderson, the safety from Dorman, is one of the best in the country. Will Clemson end up flipping the Dorman gravy train back toward Tigertown? That's a question. The Gamecocks got Marquis Anderson. Will they get Pro Anderson? I don't know if are they related. They're probably not related. Anyway, he grew up a Clemson fan, but the Gamecocks have had a lead on him. So we'll see what happens. All that. Malcolm Gaston, a big offensive lineman from North Augusta. South Carolina hasn't even offered him yet. Georgia has, and they've been across the border a couple of times to see him. And then there's more that'll pop up. I mean, you kind of look at all the players that are kind of known. There's more that'll pop up. Of course, we've talked about Jalen McGill going to Rutgers, and the more I dig into that, the more I just think South Carolina's got other running backs ahead of him, and maybe they weren't quite ready to take the commit and weren't pushing, and Rutgers was, and so he went to Rutgers. And there's a list of schools that probably fall into that same category as well. Alabama, Tennessee. There were a lot of schools that wanted him. So we'll see what happens moving forward, if there's a flip or something like that. Of course, there's some players that South Carolina has not offered that have already committed out-of-state schools. Quarterback Javon Gilmore from Gaffney to Arkansas. Wide receiver Carnell Warren from Bluffton to Virginia Tech. I mentioned McGill to Rutgers. Jude Hall, receiver from Christ Church to Duke. Scotland Dover, an offensive lineman from Gaffney to App State and Dowell Loggins. So there's been some players already make commitments out of state, but they're definitely not players that South Carolina was willing to take a commitment on right now. But you never know as we move forward. We know a recruiting cycle is a long time. So what I want to kind of focus on today is the five folks that have committed to the Gamecocks so far that are actually still in this class. Because, you could really go with 7. And they're not all in state. 3 of them are. But we're just going to break those guys down a little bit and start here because we tend to lose. I did this with Brian Rowe in the last cycle and Pup Sellers. That they kind of committed, and then we all forgot until the next football season when we saw them play. So let's get this out of the way, talk about these guys, break these guys down, and then we'll move on to the uncommitted, which is obviously much more exciting. And so we'll get these guys rolling that are committed already to the class. So the first player I'm going to talk about here is Jazavian Currents. And that's a player that obviously is one of the top players in the country. He was competing at the Navy All-American Bowl in San Antonio. Underclassmen can play in those all-star games now. Really caught the eye of just about every recruiting analyst out there. He's 6'3", 205, could play corner, could play safety. South Point High School in Rock Hill, we know that there's been an incredible amount of excellent players that have come out of South Point, including who could be the next South Carolina Gamecock in the NFL Hall of Fame, and Stephon Gilmore. And then who could forget Jadeveon Clowney, of course, the number 1 pick in the draft and special player. So he's the next guy from South Point. And boy, just a freak athlete. Player comparisons will come with Nick Emanware. He's maybe a little different than Nick, maybe a little more fluid in that he could play corner if he wanted to. And the Gamecocks may be eyeing him. Keep in mind, Torian Gray has had Jimmy Williams, Cam Chancellor, Nick Emanware, these big freak defensive backs. And Currents is the next one. Offers from all over the country, but locked and loaded with the Gamecocks. Early commit. Top recruit in the class right now, per 24/7 Sports composite rankings. Number 1 player in the state, has a 0.9650 4-star rating, which is approaching 5-star status. 72 overall right now, but I expect that to climb after his showing at the All-Star game. Just a really special talent, in my opinion, that can develop and get good. And he's an early commit, so you got that out of the way. I mean, arguably, if you went back and counted Gitteron and Murph, those may be the top three if we're sitting here 6 months ago in 2026, and there may not be anybody that tops that. I mean, maybe Anderson, maybe Watkins at Northwestern, maybe one of the linemen. But I'd have to kind of dig in and look at it closely, both comparisons and see them in person and all that to really make that determination. But Carolina, skimming off the top. I guess that's a very negative thing to say, skimming off the top, if you're talking about like a gangster movie or the movie Casino. But it's probably a good thing when you're talking about in-state football talent and recruiting and all that. So Currents is the first guy to kind of take a look at. Then another corner, and he's from the state of Georgia. It's Peyton Dyer from Duluth. Now, Duluth, interesting, because it is the alma mater, high school wise, of one George Rogers, who won the Heisman Trophy in 1980 at South Carolina, at Duluth High School. And he was also an early commit. One of those kind of came out of left field, but he's that taller corner that Torian Gray and Clayton White like. 6 foot, 190, runs well, really good athlete, productive at the high school level. The kids from Gwinnett County, where Duluth is, outside of Atlanta, they're normally very well coached. All those high schools have resources. All those high schools care about high school football. And that's kind of a double whammy, because there's a lot of high schools that care about football, and you get coached well and you play winning football, and good players, good prospects come out of there. But they don't have the resources sometimes. A lot of smaller schools and small places and things like that, but they care. And then there's some schools with a lot of resources that don't, and they're kind of the big soft batches of high school football. Just these big soft schools that have all the resources in the world. But in Gwinnett County, most of them have both. Win or lose, it's a competitive area for high school football in Georgia, kind of like a miniature Texas almost, there in Gwinnett County. So you're getting a player that has a certain floor out of Gwinnett. Now, there's been busts out of there. Don't get me wrong. Totally agreed. Atlanta has its share of busts. It's not a hard and fast deal. But I do think that what you like about him is that he has that higher floor, he has that size, and the athleticism is clear. Anything else, you'll just go from there. Watch the film, all that good stuff. Now, one little caveat with him, he visited Georgia the other week, and Anna Adams on 24/7 Sports, thebigspur.com, did report, well, we'll see how it goes. He had some good things to say. So if the Bulldogs get in the mix, then, you may have a flip. I'm just going to tell it like it is. It's February 10th, right? These things happen, especially with in-state Georgia talent. And, they obviously have a great tradition of defensive backs and things of that nature at Georgia. But we'll see. He's still committed for right now, and certainly was a good early pickup. Ranked as a high 3-star. I think 24/7 Sports is the only network that's ranked him. He's an 89. So he's the highest 3-star you can get. Maybe he goes to 4 at some point. 42nd ranked player in the state of Georgia currently. Then there is Keenan Britt, and Keenan Britt is committed. He is out of Oxford, Alabama, listed as an edge on 24/7 Sports. He's a linebacker for South Carolina, and we're going to see this as long as Clayton White's here. Edge versus what. Darren Usher, the director of player personnel, had a good relationship with him while Darren was at Auburn and then at Oregon. And when he got to South Carolina, this is one of the first guys that he targeted. The Gamecocks got him. Certainly has offers from all over. One fly in the ointment with him, and he's said all the right things publicly about being firmly committed and all that. Florida Gators took a visit there, had some good things to say. Billy Napier and his staff. Florida's got some momentum right now. That's not something that I would call likely at this point, but it's not something I can rule out. Again, it's February 10th. This class is going to look completely different, and all these guys I'm talking about, maybe the most lower rated guys in the class. I don't think Currents will be, and a couple other ones will be, but you could see a lot more. I mean, we've talked about the quarterbacks that they're targeting. That's a big deal. But we're focused on the commits today, the guys that are already in the boat. So you never know. But right now, I think that Keenan Britt's probably pretty solid. Talented linebacker, fits what Clayton White likes to do. He's a bigger kid, just like some of them. I mean, he's not as big as Fred Johnson. He's not as big as Justin Okoronkwo, but he's big, and certainly I think is a player that they can do some things with. Lots of upside. Oxford, Alabama, Northern Alabama, I believe they put out players. They have players every single year that come from Oxford. So Keenan Britt, a linebacker from the state of Alabama, to keep an eye on. Now, this next two are in-state players, and I love this guy from Newberry, Jamel House, 6'4", 215. I've said before, watching his sophomore film, you're like, that's a sophomore. Ultra athletic, very good hands. Dare I say, Josh Simon-esque. Don't know what he can do after he catches the ball against SEC defensive backs or Power 4 defensive backs, but I know what he can do in high school. And he's an early commit from Newberry. By the way, I mentioned some players earlier South Carolina's targeted. Trey Aiken is a guy from Clinton, right near Newberry. So you got a Newberry and a Clinton up I-26, and then Dorman. Well, if you go up the road, but so Aiken's a offensive lineman to keep an eye on as well. South Carolina's in good shape with. He's not listed on any rankings or anything right now, but Jamel House is just a daggum Carolina style jumbo athlete at tight end. South Carolina's had some guys like that. Josh Simon. Hayden Hurst is a little bit different in my book. He's kind of a different type of tight end. This is more like a Josh Simon, a Busta Anderson, a Jarrell Adams, a Jared Cook type of player. Basically big receivers that the physicality comes along as you go. And his ceiling's through the roof. Through the roof, Jamel House. So really like him. 24/7 Sports Composite has him as a 4-star prospect, the number 2 prospect in the state per composite, and number 11 overall. Must be a really good year at tight end if there's 10 tight ends ranked in 24/7 Sports Composite ahead of him. But another early commit. Gamecocks got in, got after it, got him on campus, knew where he wanted to go. I think that's pretty big. Now, the player you may not know about, he was the first commit in this class, committed way back May 4th of 2024. And that's offensive lineman Anthony Baxter, who's Currents' teammate at South Point. This guy is massive. Now, look, there's such a thing in high school as being too big, but there's also such a thing as being too small in high school if you don't have a frame. And you're sort of depending on nature, God, you're dependent on God in a lot of ways. And we know God has a plan. There you go. For those of you that took a shot at me the other day in the comments about the fact that I didn't go to church on Wednesdays, we know God has a plan, and it's not always what you want, right? And sometimes these offensive linemen, if they're too small, even if they have the frame, they can't put on the weight. You're kind of out of luck. It's much easier to get it off of them and reshape big athletic bodies than it is to build them up. Now, in recruiting, the philosophy I know at 24/7 Sports, as far as rankings goes, the opposite. They want guys that are kind of smaller that they can build up. Thus, the whole Cam Pringle versus Josiah Thompson debate last year. And hey, they ended up being right as far as right now about Thompson. I don't know if Pringle will be better in time or not, but Thompson was able to put the weight on and play for South Carolina, starting just about every game at left tackle when he was healthy. And Pringle had a red shirt, and Pringle will probably take a few years. That's not always the case, though, and you look around the SEC and kind of look at what Alabama and Georgia through the years have done on offensive line. They like beef, and there are a lot of bigger offensive linemen both in the state and that Carolina's targeting. And Anthony Baxter fits that mold. The thing I know about him is he's huge. He's listed at 6'3", 335. Um, Probably an interior guy because he's 6'3". If he could get 3 more inches, who knows? But he can move for a young player that size. You watch what clips there are of him, and he's moving for a player that size. And so we'll see. I'd like to see this kid in a camp and just really get an idea in person of how quick he is with his feet and hands and things of that nature. But the size is definitely there. And what limited clips I have seen, it really shows out the ability to move and be athletic. And we know that's important because if you're playing offensive line, you're going against defensive linemen that are big and can move and are athletic, especially in this league. And you got Clemson on the schedule every year. They're not going anywhere with regards to them having a good defensive line. I mean, it's a murderer's row if you're an offensive lineman each and every season at South Carolina. And so you need as much ammo as you can get when you're putting together your five. Now, it's going to be a long time probably before Anthony Baxter starts, but hopefully you guys down the road will remember that. Hey, I remember Coffee February 10th, 2025, when JC was talking about Baxter being able to move. So, I think that those five are more than solid. It's a good start. Obviously, there's more meat on the bone if you're the Gamecocks as far as recruiting both in-state and out-of-state. I don't know if you saw this. The number 2 player in the country, Zion Ely, who's committed to Maryland, who's from Maryland. Sterling Lucas has told him that Gamecocks want him. He's from St. Francis Academy. But he says he's going to visit along with just about everybody else in college football. But hey, you go and you get the guy to visit, and that's great, right? I mean, shoot, Jared Curtis is coming in. I mean, there's a lot of potential, right? I mean, you look at the top 10 in the country for 2026, and I'm going to veer off and go out of state. Top 10 in the country per 24. I'll just go with 24/7 Sports instead of Composite right now because it fits my narrative. Right? Isn't that what everybody does these days? They're just going to go with whatever fits their narrative. Anyway, Ely's number 2. Well, wait a minute. Are all these guys? No, not that guy. Sorry, I'll go with 24/7 Sports. So Zion Ely, number 2 in the country, says he's going to visit officially. Jared Curtis, number 7 overall in the country per 24/7, number 2 in Composite, has scheduled an official visit for June 20th. And then Rodney Dunham, who's number 9, according to 24/7 Sports, and who Hill McGranahan has a crystal ball in, defensive end, 6'4", 227. By the way, those that are listening, Jared Curtis is a quarterback, 5-star quarterback. Zion Ely is a 5-star defensive end, just to make sure, because sometimes I just assume like I'm talking to my buddies and who, what? So Zion Ely, 6'3.5", 220, St. Francis Academy, Baltimore, Maryland, number 2 overall, committed to Maryland, but will visit South Carolina. Sterling Lucas has been up to see him. Number 7 overall, Jared Curtis, quarterback, 6'4", 225, was committed to Georgia from Nashville Christian, Nashville, Tennessee. Does some freaky things, Mahomes-esque things. Again, I haven't seen the Super Bowl yet, so don't think I'm pulling any highlights from that. But he's got a visit to South Carolina scheduled for June 20th, and then Rodney Dunham, 6'4", 227, another defensive end from Myers Park in Charlotte. He's been to South Carolina more than any other place. Those Tennessee Volunteers are in the mix. I believe right now, if I had to guess, it's a South Carolina-Tennessee battle. That's 3 of the top 10 in the country. Now, at some point during the last recruiting cycle, I think South Carolina had, David Sanders was up there, and the Xavier Griffin from Georgia, what's his name? Elijah Griffin from Savannah, the D tackle that ended up at Georgia, was considering the Gamecocks. Elijah Griffin. There's a Xavier Griffin in Gainesville, Georgia, committed to Southern Cal for 2026. Carolina fell off on those guys. They actually had Elijah Griffin, David Sanders, Amari Adams. That's 3 of the top 11 in 2025 that did not end up coming to South Carolina. Flirted with Isaiah Gibson. I mean, there's a lot of guys that were highly ranked that just kind of fell off. That Deuce Knight and Cunningham, two highly ranked guys from Mississippi had the Gamecocks up. So the point is, this kind of don't I'm not gonna say don't get your hopes up because there's probably a little more staying power after a really good season. And again, your season affects 2024 season affects 2026 recruiting, just like 2022 season affected 2024 recruiting. So, maybe you can get your hopes up, but it's just something to watch here on February 10th when you consider there's a lot of good players that like South Carolina. And the more you have that, eventually you're going to get more than just Dylan Stewart and Nick Harbor and 1 5-star. Sometimes you're going to get 2 or 3. And that's how you end up getting talent, getting whatever the blue chip ratio means in there. But yeah, I think that when you look at this class, it's got a load of upside, but the guy's already committed. That's a strong foundation of players right now, even though I say that saying, hey, Florida's in it, trying to get in the mix with Britt from Alabama, the linebacker. And Georgia obviously has snuck over to Duluth, and they like the tall corner Dyer. So we'll see. There's going to be battles, and that's big boy recruiting, man. I think it's one thing, South Carolina does a good job of finding guys in state, and these are guys you should be excited about no matter who they get are offered. I mean, if you've got a kid that's, got great speed or size or upside or whatever, even if he doesn't have a great offer list, yeah, still get excited about those guys. But when you're trying to battle for the best of the best. And I'm not talking necessarily about stars and high rankings. I'm just talking about players. When others, when a bunch of programs kind of agree, that means the chances of missing are lower. Now, look, we have all seen Cam Scott in men's basketball. Everybody wanted him, and we've seen what happened. So it's not 100% in all sports, right? But that's telling that you're doing a pretty good job just because it's kind of a consensus. And it's not like South Carolina was offering these players after everybody else did and tagging on, So I think that's always good and a good sign you're going to get a heck of a class regardless. And I think with what Beamer and company did with 2025, nobody really saw it being a top 20 class in the middle of summer. Finished off well, and then lo and behold, some of the guys they had committed for a long time, the evaluators ended up thinking they were pretty good. We'll see what happens. It's all an inexact science, but it's always better to have players, I think, that are, that make sense than players that maybe don't make sense. And by don't make sense, I mean, if you don't have measurables, you don't have an offer list, you don't have production, you're just kind of a guy and you beat Conference USA and the American, and maybe you won ACC on them. Sometimes those guys are the ones that don't turn out. Now, sometimes they do. But like Rashad Fenton was a guy, I think Carolina beat Louisville on him, and he ended up being good in the NFL. But Rashad ran a 4.4. He had that speed. He's a South Florida defensive back. He had film. So you got to have something. And honestly, I haven't seen a whole lot of players that South Carolina's taken that just absolutely don't make sense. I know a lot, there's been busts, but the initial take, really since the Spurrier era, when they took some guys that, kind of like, well, what does this dude do well? He's a bigger safety that doesn't run. You're just like, what position is he going to play? And they hadn't really done that since. And I'm not trying to shoot arrows at Steve Spurrier and his staff. It's just different now. I mean, I think for a while, at least when they take guys, they make sense. In most cases, I could probably go find one or two. All right. Be sure to listen to Inside the Gamecocks, the morning show later today. I'm sure Jamie and Phil and Whittle and Mike Morgan, I think, is usually on Mondays. We'll talk about the Super Bowl, and then Phil and I will definitely be by to talk Super Bowl, big picture recruiting, lots of topics like Phil and I always roll out on Inside the Gamecocks, the show. That's from 12 to 2. Don't forget, too, we are having our extravaganza for opening day in baseball, and that'll be a big topic. Whittle had a great article on the Big Spur about the final scrimmage. A lot of stuff happening with baseball, including the starting rotation. I'm sure that will be discussed later today. There's some insight on that from Bradford and Whittle both. I'm sure they will share a little of it. And then don't forget, from 10 to 2, all 4 hours, myself, Jamie Bradford, Phil Mad Dog Mullinax. I think they're going to be live. At least Jamie will be live from Founders Park like we did last year. All kinds of people will be on. Paul Maneri will be on. Monty Lee will be on. We'll have Ray Tanner on. All those former players that join us, Grayson Griner, all these guys. Justin Smoke, Stuart Lake, maybe Chad Holbrook, I would think. Just everybody. The baseball crew on Inside the Gamecocks, the morning show. But we're all going to be together for a 4-hour tour. Opening day for the Palmetto era at South Carolina. Also a special day for Ray Tanner, as it's going to be renamed Ray Tanner Field at Founders Park, which is well deserved. Don't forget to download the Chief Sports app. Please hit the subscribe button here on YouTube if you're following along on YouTube. If you're on the podcast version, please rate Inside the Gamecocks podcast stream, where you can get this, the morning show, late night Gamecock show, the walkthrough, specials, anything. Please rate us 5 stars if you don't mind. That really helps get our podcast out there to more Gamecock fans, the podcast version, and do the same on YouTube. Appreciate you guys listening today. Again, pre-recorded, but hey, I got through it and had fun doing it. This class of 2026, folks, is not the last time we'll talk about this ever. It's going to be a big point of discussion moving forward, because I think there's a lot of potential there to have yet another good class stacked on top of good class on top of good class. That's how you get it rolling. I think that's how you have enough talent to compete year to year in this brutal football conference called the SEC. JC Shurburtt signing off. You guys have a wonderful Monday, and we'll see you on the show later.